Psalm 46, 10-11, the Bible tells us, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge." Selah. It's interesting here. God tells us to be still. When we consider the grammar here in this psalm, be is a state of being verb. It's not an action verb. So what that means is whatever God is telling us to be, he's not telling us to perform something. He's telling us to simply remain the way that he's telling us to be. The state in which you and I are to live in order to recognize that God is who he said he is, and God will be exalted as he said he would be, the state in which we are to be is still. It's interesting when you study that word still, there's many different definitions. There are adjectives that can be applied to. It can be applied as an adverb. It can be applied as a verb. But in this sense, it's being applied as a noun. And to be still, that noun simply means this: free from noise. Calm or free from noise. And so the state in which God is commanding you and I to be, if we are to recognize him for who he is still. What a wonderful thought. You and I, if we are going to recognize God in our life for who he is and what he is to us, we simply need to remain free from noise or disturbance. The psalmist well embodies this truth in Psalm 77. I would encourage you today to take some time out of your day and to read Psalm 77. I'll begin reading to you in verse number 3. The Bible says this: the psalmist, he's crying to God, and he makes this statement: "I remembered God and was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed." Selah. He remembered God and was troubled. He called out to God and was overwhelmed. You see, he was considering God in the midst of the noise of life. You ever do that? I find myself sometimes doing that. Sometimes it's easy for us to think, well, I have all these financial responsibilities. I've got the electric, I've got the water, I've got the sewer, I've got the mortgage, I've got the fuel, I've got insurance. I've got all these different financial responsibilities, and I'm expected to tithe and give to missions. What did we just do? We considered God in the midst of the noise of life. Some will say, well, I have all these daily responsibilities. I've got work. I've got the maintenance on the house and the vehicles. I've got family time. I've got this and I've got that. And I've got all my church responsibilities. What have we done? We've considered our service to God in the midst of the noise of life. Some will say, well, I have this relationship, this marriage or this family relationship that I'm working on, and I'm trying to spend time in my Bible, and I'm trying to pray, and they lump their relationship with Christ in with the rest of the noise of life. What has happened? God becomes a note in the song rather than the song. Look what the psalmist says in verse number 4. "Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak." So troubled that I cannot speak. "I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with mine own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever? Doth his promise fail forevermore? Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah." But then he comes in verse number 10 and he makes a decision, and I want you to understand the significance of the decision. Verse number 10, he says, "And I said, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of all thy work and talk of thy doings. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? You see, in the first part of this passage, he's talking about God as a distant person. He's talking about God as though he's not in the conversation. He's talking to other people about God. And well, he remembered God and he was troubled and he called to God, but God didn't answer. But then we see here in verse number 10, he makes a decision. He said, I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. And then he turns his conversation to God. Look what he says. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. You see, in verse 10, he realized the problem was not God. The problem was not his situation. The problem was he. He was the reason that God had become a duty rather than a rest from his duty. He was the reason that God seemed so far off. He was the reason that God became merely a note in the song of life rather than the reason for the singing. And when he decided to stop and be still, he considered all that God had done, all that God was still doing, and all that God had promised so to do. The Lord gave me this truth this morning. We're up here in Pennsylvania where I grew up as a boy for many, many years. I'd spend the summers up here, many fall and winter days I spent up here hunting. As I walked outside this morning, it is just pouring down rain. And yet with the rain dropping all around, walking over towards the woods, you know what I could hear? I just walked over towards the woods and I stood. And I heard squirrels running across the leaves. I heard birds chirping. I heard a bird singing. And I heard the rain just dropping. All the while, the rain is feeding the trees and feeding the soil and feeding the plants and the chipmunks, the birds. They're not concerned with the rain. Because in the midst of the storm, they have a shelter. You know something? When I consider the stillness in the midst of the storm, I'm not troubled by the storm. Say, Brother Hauser, what does it mean to be still? It simply means to be free from noise or disturbance. You know, when I remove myself from the hustle and bustle and I just consider, I'm still. Not idle or immobile, but at peace. I'm not suggesting that we all take a vacation and we all go to the Bahamas or we all go to a cabin in the woods. What I'm suggesting is that in the midst of the storms of life, in the midst of the hustle and bustle, in the midst of the noise, that we decide to consider. You today, might I encourage you, don't make the mistake of lumping God in with the rest of your responsibilities. Step back and consider all he is to you and allow him to be the rest in the midst of responsibilities. Some today, financially, need to take a step back and just consider all that God has done for you up to this point. Consider the times financially that God has brought you through. Consider the times recently that God has provided in miraculous ways. Some today are overburdened with labor and care, and you need to just take a step back and consider all the many times God has helped you through the burden. Some, battling through turmoil in life's relationships, need to take a step back and consider all the ways that God has led you in the past to bring you to where you are today. Be still. Do you want to live a life free from noise and disturbance? Might I encourage you today, before you start your day, take time to consider the years of the right hand. Take time to consider all that he's done for you in the past, all the ways he's protected you, all the ways that he's guided you, all the ways that he's provided for you. Hey, at midday, when in the midst of life, when difficulties come, take time to consider all that God is still doing for you today. And at midnight, when overwhelmed with care, consider his promises that have never failed. I've been through some very dark midnights, but I'm thankful to say that there's always been a sunrise. And you today may be in a midnight. You today may be in a difficulty. Don't make the mistake of lumping God in with the rest of the noise. Take a step back and consider all that he's done for you, all that he's still doing for you. And what you'll find is you can be still. You can be free from disturbance in the midst of the storm. I believe the key to a life free from disturbance is a heart that considers. May I say today, life is not easy. But thank God that if we will take a step back and consider, we can have a stillness in our soul in the midst of life's storms. Might I encourage you today not to stop, not to take a break, but to just be still. Remove yourself mentally from the noise enough that you consider all that God has done, all that God is doing, and all that God will do in the future. Be still and know that he is God. We love you, folks. We'll see you this Sunday morning in class.